That will clear and it will turn fresher for all.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
On radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
with honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome to The Briefing with me, Gloria De Piero. We're talking housing today as the government unveils plans for rental reform. And what does the resignation of Boris Johnson's ethics advisor, Lord Guide, mean for the Prime Minister? And my Real Me interview is with the Conservative MP, Craig McKinley, who reckons many of the Tory rebels in last week's vote were people who dislike the Prime Minister and want to overturn Brexit. Plus, we're discussing interest rates, the menopause and rape convictions. But first, here is your news with Rhiannon.
Good afternoon. It's just gone midday. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. The government has published the resignation letter from Boris Johnson's former ethics advisor, who suddenly left his position yesterday. Lord Guide says he was asked to consider measures that risk a deliberate and purposeful breach of the ministerial code, which he said he could play no part in. Lord Guide said he was put in an impossible position over advice relating to the Trade Remedies Authority. Boris Johnson said his resignation came as a surprise. He's the second ethics advisor to resign under the Prime Minister in 3 years. Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab told GB News he was also surprised to hear of the resignation.
There's also the fact that he was talking to Number 10 just this week about an extension for 6 months. So I was surprised to hear the news, and I know there was a specific issue which is commercially sensitive, so I'm limited in what I can say, that he was asked to look at and in the national interest. And again, I don't know whether it was related to that. I think we'll hear more today. Number 10 will give a further update.
And some breaking news just in. The Bank of England has raised interest rates from 1% to 1.25%, the highest since January 2009. Oscar-winning actor Kevin Spacey can return to the US after being granted unconditional bail over charges of sexually assaulting 3 men. The 62-year-old faced 4 counts of sexual assault and 1 count of causing a person to engage in sexual activity without consent. His lawyers told Westminster Magistrates Court his client strenuously denies all and any criminality. Mr. Spacey will next appear at Southwark Crown Court on the 14th of July. The wife of a missing British journalist in Brazil has said she can now bring her husband home after bodies were found. Dom Phillips and Indigenous expert Bruno Pereira were last seen in the Amazon over 10 days ago. The Brazilian government said the remains were discovered near where the pair disappeared. The bodies have yet to be formally identified. Local police said a suspect led them to the location after confessing to the fatal shooting. The Transport Secretary says next week's rail strikes are an incredible act of self-harm. Grant Shapps says they're designed to inflict damage at the worst possible time, and he says they're an attempt to derail critical reforms. Unions have described the national rail strikes over pay, jobs and conditions as the biggest in history. Tenants will be given more powers to challenge poor practices and unjustified rent increases by their landlords. That's as part of the government's new deal for private renters in England. The publication of a new government white paper later will also end blanket bans on families with children and those on benefits. The measures will form part of the Renters Reform Bill. It aims to redress the balance between landlords and privately renting households across England. Freddie Poser, director of Priced Out, says there needs to be more building of homes across the country.
It doesn't really matter if we're building social homes or market rate homes. We need to build all of these sorts of homes, and we need to the government needs to stop sort of applying sticking plaster after sticking plaster and actually tackle the root of this problem, which is supply.
The UK could pull out of the European Human Rights Convention. It's after a Strasbourg-based court blocked government plans to send asylum seekers to Rwanda. Downing Street said all options were on the table and hasn't ruled out withdrawing from the European Convention on Human Rights. Specialist rape courts are being set up as part of a trial in England to try and improve conviction rates for sexual offences. The government says court staff and police will receive specialist training. Advisors will also be on hand for victims. The pilot scheme will be rolled out in Leeds, Newcastle and Snaresbrook Crown Courts, each with a dedicated courtroom for dealing with rape cases. And archaeologists working on an HS2 site have discovered a burial ground containing nearly 140 graves. The site in Wendover, Buckinghamshire, is one of the largest Anglo-Saxon burial grounds ever uncovered in Britain. One skeleton was found with an iron object embedded in its spine, which experts believe may have contributed to their death. Items from the 5th and 6th centuries were also found, including brooches, amber beads and knives. This is GB News. We'll have more as it happens now, though. It's over to the briefing with Gloria and Liam.
Coming up this hour on the briefing, the Bank of England has just raised interest rates again, which will take mortgage rates to a 13-year high. Our economics editor will join us in a minute. The government has announced major reforms to the rental market. Will they really make a difference? I'll discuss that with Conservative MP Nikki Aitken. The Prime Minister's ethics advisor, Lord Geit, finally resigned last night. Is the Prime Minister in peril again, or is he safe from his own MPs for now? I'll discuss that with the Mail's Andrew Pearce. Shadow Justice Minister Ellie Reeves joins me to discuss reforms to the way accusations of rape are dealt with. Will it finally raise the dire rates of conviction? And my Real Me interview is with Conservative MP Craig McKinley. He reckons some of the Tory rebels voting against the Prime Minister are Remainers who want to get shot of him to reverse Brexit. As you heard in the news bulletin, the Bank of England has just raised interest rates for the 5th time in a row. Joining me now is our business and economics editor, Liam Halligan. Liam, what's the thinking behind this rise and how much are they going up by?
No surprise that interest rates have gone up, Gloria. It was only a question not of if, but by how much. This is at the lower end of expectations. We thought that interest rates could go up not by 0.25%, 25 basis points, as we say, but by 0.5% after the Federal Reserve, the Bank of England's equivalent in America, raised interest rates by 0.75% overnight. The thinking is it's been since December, the Bank of England's raised interest rates 5 times in a row now to 1.25%, where they currently are, because inflation is rising. Price rises are out there, the cost of living increases. The thinking is that if you slow down the economy by making it more expensive to borrow, whether you're a mortgage holder, you've got other private debts or whatever it is, then that means demand in the economy will be suppressed, so those price rises will be suppressed. It sounds brutal. It is brutal. The thinking is that it's better to have a bit more of a slowdown than inflation spiralling up beyond where it currently is from 9% up to 15 or 20% like it was in the 1970s, because then you really do get a serious collapse in economic activity as business confidence goes out the window and consumers are hit with an even bigger cost of living squeeze.
Is there any hope on the horizon for some good economic news?
I think there is, in the sense that I was really early on this inflation.
You were.
I took a lot of criticism from many other economic journalists and indeed from officials at the Bank of England who were not very nice about me on certain occasions. But having been early to predict that inflation would go up, I'm going to say that I do think inflation will fall out of the system quite soon if, and it's a big if, we can get some kind of settlement between Russia and Ukraine, and this ghastly conflict in Europe means that there's less upward pressure on oil prices, gas prices and food prices. If that happens, then I do think inflation could fall away quite quickly, and then we can stay where interest rates currently are or even drop them a little bit again. But we are in a difficult situation, be in no doubt. It's not quite a 1970s stagflation situation yet. We're not yet in recession, which is 2 consecutive quarters, 6 months, if you like, of economic slowdown. We have had 2 months now of economic slowdown, and I suspect that's one reason, Gloria, why the 9 economists on the Monetary Policy Committee may have only increased interest rates by 0.25% and not 0.5% as many people were expecting.
Clear as ever. Thank you. Thank you, Liam Halligan. Now, Housing Secretary Michael Gove has published proposals to improve life for renters, promising the biggest shake-up in the private rental sector for 30 years. No fault eviction will be banned, and it will be illegal for landlords to have blanket bans for those who are on benefits. Our London reporter, Alice Porter, is outside the houses of... She's there in Westminster. Good morning, Alice. Just tell us about some of the detail.
Good morning. Well, one of the most important parts of this paper is, as you were saying there, the banning of no-fault eviction. And that means when a landlord or landlady wants to evict somebody, they don't have to give a reason for it. And they have the person or an entire family has 2 months to vacate the property. And in terms of the scale of this, over the last 3 years or so, the housing charity Shelter, that about 200,000 private renters have been in this situation. And sometimes it's often when people have perhaps complained about the quality of the housing, issues to do with the house, they suddenly find themselves signed with an eviction notice. So this has very much been welcomed by charities today, who are delighted by the news that these evictions will not continue in the way that they have been, although others will say this is long overdue because this was something that Theresa May was talking about back in 2019. So that's one of the most important aspects of the paper. The second is a clear commitment from the government to improve the quality of the private rental housing. About 21% of private rental accommodation is described by the government as unfit. I mean, 21%, that's a very significant figure. So they're wanting to introduce a minimum standard across the private rental sector, and that would be called the Decent Homes Standard. Now, that is already in social housing, and they want to extend that to the private sector as well. But I think there will be some people who may be critical of that because the government is currently reviewing that very standard. So the devil may be in the detail there. And thirdly, there's also within this paper a push to make the complaints procedure for both tenants and landlords easier to stop it escalating and going to court. Eddie Hughes is the Minister for Rough Sleeping and Housing, and this is what he had to say.
There will be an ombudsman, so that there'll be an independent party that can resolve disputes between tenants and landlords without having to go for legal recourse. That should make it quicker and easier for those disputes to be resolved. But I say that abolishing Section 21 means that tenants will be able to report complaints to their landlord, safe in the knowledge that that landlord won't be able to evict them just because they've complained about the condition of their property. And I think that's vital to strengthening the hand of the tenant.
That's Eddie Hughes speaking there. And if you are a cat lover or a dog lover and you want your pet in rented accommodation, then this will also be good news for you from today with this paper, because it will be easier for people to have pets in their accommodation, and the landlord or landlady can't do a blanket ban on pets, and they have to consider your application.
Alice Porter, thank you indeed for that update. Well, today there will be a debate in Parliament to tighten up the system to avoid abuse of short-term letting. Conservative MP Nikki Aiken is leading it. We'll ask her in a moment about that. But first, in the past half an hour, the Prime Minister's former ethics advisor, Lord Geidt, has had his resignation letter published after he quit last night. In it, he says he was asked to consider measures which deliberately breached the ministerial code. He said, "This request has placed me in an impossible and odious position. The idea that a Prime Minister might to any degree be in the business of deliberately breaching his own code is an affront. I can have no part in this." Nikki Aiken joins us now. There she is. Hello, Nikki. Good to see you. We wanted you on the programme because we want to talk about the debate that you're having today. The rental sector is very important to many people. But I do just want to ask you for your reaction to Lord Geidt's resignation letter.
I haven't read it, to be honest. I have been too busy this morning looking at my short-term lets debate speech this morning. So I can't really say much about it, Gloria, because I haven't read it.
Read a line to you. The idea that a Prime Minister might to any degree be in the business of deliberately breaching his own code is an affront. I can have no part in this.
Well, look, that is very concerning to hear that. And I'm sure the Prime Minister will be considering what he does next on what Lord Geidt has said. I'm sure we will be hearing more this afternoon on a replacement for Lord Geidt. And, you know, I think we are all aware that the ministerial code is there for a reason and that ministers have got to adhere to it. And let's see what the Prime Minister has to say about what Geidt has actually written.
Now, the government are shaking up the rental sector. They're proposing to do that. They say their plans will redress the balance between landlords and the estimated 4.4 million private tenants in England. You've got your own debate on a related subject today. Do the government plans go far enough in your view?
Oh, this is I quote, Shelter, who's hardly the greatest advocate for the government at the best of times. Their chief exec has described it as a game changer, and I really think it is. For too long, tenants have lived literally in fear of highlighting concerns they may have about their homes. I know from having been a councillor before for 16 years, I've often been shocked at the state of some homes that people have felt not able to complain about, mould, dodgy electrics, you name it, because if they brought it up with their landlord, they thought that they may get evicted. And it is right that we give tenants much more protection because, you know, I think the private rented sector has grown by about doubled in size in the last 30 years. So more and more people are living in rented accommodation, particularly because of house prices. People can't afford homes, or particularly in places like London and my constituency. Gloria, the average house price in my constituency is nearly £1 million. That is ridiculous. So we have got to ensure that we've got to ensure that people living in rented accommodation have got fit and safe homes to live in.
And more than a fifth of private renters who moved in 2019 and 2020 did not end their tenancy by choice. How should that be tightened up?
Well, the government has announced today that it's going to be ending the Section 21, which allows a landlord to give notice to a tenant without any reason. This is very close to my heart, Gloria, because I have very close family who are now living in rented accommodation. And I know firsthand how you never feel safe after once you've paid your rent, whether you are ever going to be evicted. My family's very lucky that they have got an excellent landlord, but they are lucky. So I think it's right to give tenants that reassurance, particularly those with children, because the last thing you want to be doing is trying to find a new home if you've got small ones, and particularly if they're at school. So I am absolutely delighted with the announcement today by Eddie Hughes, and I'm looking forward to going into the chamber hopefully soon to hear exactly what he's got to say.
And just on the government's figures, on the 1.6 million people living in dangerously low quality homes, you referred to the quality yourself in an early answer. How will that situation be changed? What are the government going to do about that?
Well, there will be a new private renters ombudsman, and hopefully that will strengthen the powers, because it's about holding landlords to account. Yes, we have got the environmental health laws, and we've got the Housing Act, but too many landlords are still not doing what they should be doing. So it is absolutely right that we bring in powers that provide local authorities and others to hold those landlords to account. And it's not up to the tenant to have to pay the ultimate price of having to move out or get evicted if they complain. As I said, everybody has got the right to live in a safe, warm and fit for purpose home.
Final question. You have campaigned on menopause awareness. I'm interested in your thoughts on the British Medical Journal report today, where some experts said it was wrong to medicalise the natural process and promote the idea of reversing it with HRT. They argue we should focus on the positives, such as freedom from menstruation, pregnancy and contraception. What do you think?
Well, I have to say I'm quite disappointed by that attitude. It is obviously we should be embracing the menopause. I'm a menopausal woman, Gloria, and I think I'm on the next stage of my life. It is a change in life, and we should be embracing it. But as I know from personal experience and speaking to hundreds of women in my constituency and in Parliament, some women go through hell. And I think what we've been doing with the menopause revolution, and I've been working alongside Carolyn Harris and others as part of the menopause APPG, is to highlight the issues that women have. It's about breaking down the barriers and breaking that silence. Too many of us for too long have been suffering in silence, and I mean suffering. And for those women who do not suffer any symptom, that's amazing. And, you know, I am fairly jealous. But I know that women do suffer. They suffer from night sweats. They suffer from depression. They suffer from insomnia, the whole host of symptoms. I'm on HRT and it has changed my life. And I would not want any woman to feel that it is not right to go and ask for help. It is about information and supporting women when they need it. It shouldn't be a taboo subject. And we shouldn't be criticising any woman who is saying, help, I need support during the change. It is a change. And yes, God, I can't wait to end my periods. Please. You know, I don't want any more children. Thank you very much. I've done my bit. I can do without the periods now and all those pleasant side effects. So, yeah, I am embracing the menopause. But in fact, I just need a little bit of help from HRT and then away I go.
Pleasure to listen to you on all the subjects today, particularly like that robust response on the last answer. Thank you, Nikki Aitken. Enjoy the debate today. I hope it goes well. After the break, the Prime Minister's ethics advisor finally quit in a surprise move last night. We'll have a roundup of the political stories of the week with the journalist Andrew Pearce. We will be back in a minute.
I'm Liam Halligan. Join me every weekday at 1 p.m. for On the Money, your daily dose of economics, business and consumer news. I've got 25 years experience covering economics and finance. We hold grown-up discussions with a host of experts who really know their stuff. We can't buy gas and store it. That was a mistake, wasn't it?
I think it was a mistake.
Even you, Liam, don't have a crystal ball.
Inflation's a real threat.
Every weekday at 1, you're On the Money.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
On radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere. We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
with honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
As we've heard, the Prime Minister's ethics advisor, Lord Geidt, took Westminster by surprise when he resigned last night. The government has just published his resignation letter. In it, he says he was asked to consider measures which deliberately breached the ministerial code. He said, "This request has placed me in an impossible and odious position. The idea that a Prime Minister might to any degree be in the business of deliberately breaching his own code is an affront. I can have no part in this." To talk about this and much more of the politics of the week is Andrew Pearce of the Daily Mail. Andrew, hello.
Hi,
good
Gloria,
to see you. Are you missing Kevin? Because we're going to tell our viewers that we're going to have a regular double act with you two, but Kevin couldn't be with us today. So,
he's frightened. He's frit. He's frit.
So I will have to balance your arguments. The government wants to move on from all of this, from Partygate, to whether the Prime Minister is fit for office. It's just not that easy, is it, to move on?
No, I mean, they thought the Tories, they finally got onto the front foot over the rail strike, over their policy on Rwanda, which, of course, the Labour Party is opposing. But Partygate's come back to bite him on the ankles, on the chin, on the face, call it what you will. I thought it was very curious that Lord Geidt resigned yesterday, Gloria, because I'd have thought if he was going to resign over Partygate, he'd have done it when he published his annual report, where he seemed to imply that the ministerial code may have been broken by Boris Johnson getting a fine, a £50 fine. And we know that there was a real tug of war with him over whether he would or wouldn't go. Now he's gone 24 hours after a very, very uncomfortable session with a committee of MPs. But it seems from the letter which Downing Street have released, it isn't anything to do with Partygate. It's to do with another issue, a future issue that's coming down the line, where it appears the Prime Minister, according to Lord Geidt, is going to break all sorts of codes to do with trade policy and to do with the World Trade Organization. So whether this is something to do with the Northern Ireland Protocol or some post-Brexit related deal, we're not sure. But he uses very tough language. He talks about, he uses the word odious. So he thinks what the Prime Minister is proposing is unacceptable. I just wish he'd gone into a bit more detail so he can put it in a proper context.
And with that in mind, how are they going to find a new ethics advisor? Of course, Lord Geidt was the second one to resign.
Well, I've got a hunch that they're not exactly queuing round the block to take the job, because the first one, Alex Allen, who'd been in Number 10 when John Major was around, he went because he said that Priti Patel, the Home Secretary, had bullied her staff. Therefore, she should go because that's a breach of the ministerial code. Boris Johnson, very loyal to Priti Patel, simply ignored the wish of Alex Allen. Hence, he resigned. Boris Johnson has refused to resign over Partygate. He'll have to be dragged screaming and shouting, Gloria, out of Number 10. You know that. I know that. So he's now lost another ethics advisor, although again, I say it wasn't over that issue specifically about Partygate, but he did admit, didn't he, in that committee hearing that it had been a tough year, a busy year, because he's also been looking at Matt Hancock and PPE contracts, all sorts of other issues. And I think he's just become exhausted by it. And he hated the perception that he might be turning into a Downing Street patsy. I've known him for years, Gloria. I knew him when he was working for the Queen. He was her private secretary. He's as tough as old boots. He's a real stellar civil servant. He's had a stellar career, very discreet, very understated. So this is a blow for Boris, there's no doubt about it. But they'll be hoping they can move on quickly if they can show this isn't directly to do with Partygate.
OK. Another big story this week, and certainly it's going to be a big story next week, the rail strike. Now, most of the striking workers haven't had a pay rise since 2020. It's fair enough for them to say it's not good enough, we're off on strike, isn't it?
No, it's not, Gloria, because lots of people haven't had a pay rise. Lots of people, unlike the rail workers, lost their jobs during the pandemic, the private sector in particular. Tens of thousands of people lost their jobs. The government stepped in. That's you and I, the taxpayer, your viewers who paid taxes, stepped in to the tune of £16 billion to prop up the railways during the pandemic. And the madness of this strike, the utter madness, the volume of passengers on the railways is down 20 to 25% since lockdown, because more and more people now work from home. What's going to be their response to this strike next week? Cynically timed on alternate days. 3-day strike, which effectively wipes out an entire week. It means even more people, Gloria, will not go back to work, or they'll start working from home, which means there'll be even less demand for trains, which means these people are turkeys voting for Christmas. They're going to do themselves out of a job. And I've talked to people in the last week who will not be able to go to work next week. They're on 0 hours contracts. They won't get paid. People who've got hospital appointments, doctor's appointments, they won't be able to get there because of this train strike. Lots of kids doing their GCSEs and A-levels next week. They won't be able to get there. Now, it doesn't bother me. It might bother you, but a lot of people aren't going to get to Glastonbury Festival either because of the strike. And it's not my bag, really. I'm not into Diana Ross.
Not mine either. But those tickets are expensive.
People want to go. Yeah, but a lot of people want to go. And it is a big job creating scheme in the culture sector. So I think they should think again, Gloria, because I don't think they've got public on their side. And I wonder if you do manage to get Sir Keir Boring Starmer on your programme, if you can possibly get him to give us a view rather than sitting on the fence as he does on so many of these big issues. It's called leadership, Sir Keir. Leadership. You're the leader of the opposition. Tell us if you support the strike. He won't.
Very briefly, as a Conservative supporter, but you're certainly not a Labour supporter, do you ever wish Boris Johnson was a bit more boring?
That's a fantastic question. Sometimes I do, Gloria, but it's not possible. He is what he is. It's on the tin. He's a cat with not 9 lives, Gloria, 99, and currently I think he's used up about 73 of them.
Andrew Pearce, you're always a joy. Thank you. Speak next week.
Lovely.
After the break, we'll be speaking to Shadow Justice Minister Ali Reeves on the one-year progress report on the government's rate review published today. Plus, a Real Meat interview with Craig McKinley, where he opens up about his decision to move from Ukip to the Conservative Party and says some of those who voted to get rid of the Prime Minister last week want to overturn Brexit. All that after the news with Rhiannon.
Thank you, Gloria. 12:31, your top stories from the GB newsroom. The government has published the resignation letter from Boris Johnson's former ethics advisor and the Prime Minister's response. Lord Geidt, who left his position suddenly yesterday, says he was asked to consider measures that risk a deliberate and purposeful breach of the ministerial code, which he said he could play no part in. Boris Johnson's called Lord Geidt's resignation a surprise. He's the second ethics advisor to resign under the Prime Minister in 3 years. The Bank of England has increased the rate of inflation from 1% to 1.25%, the highest since January 2009, as the cost of living continues to soar. It's the 5th consecutive rise in interest rates. The Transport Secretary says next week's rail strikes are an incredible act of self-harm. Grant Shapps says they're designed to inflict damage at the worst possible time, and he says they're an attempt to derail critical reforms. Unions have described the national rail strikes over pay, jobs and conditions as the biggest in history. The wife of a missing British journalist in Brazil has said she can now bring her husband home after bodies were found. Dom Phillips and Indigenous expert Bruno Pereira were last seen in the Amazon over 10 days ago. The Brazilian government said the remains were discovered near where the pair disappeared. The bodies have yet to be formally identified. And Oscar-winning actor Kevin Spacey can return to the US after being granted unconditional bail over charges of sexually assaulting 3 men. The 62-year-old faced 4 counts of sexual assault and 1 count of causing a person to engage in sexual activity without consent. His lawyers told Westminster Magistrates Court his client strenuously denies all and any criminality. TV online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. It's back to the briefing with Gloria in just a moment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere. We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
with honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Only 1.3% of sexual offences reported to the police lead to a conviction, a figure the government says it is deeply ashamed of. Today, Justice Secretary Dominic Raab has announced a raft of measures designed to support victims and improve conviction rates for rape. I'm delighted to be joined by Shadow Justice Minister Ellie Reeves. Good to see you, Ellie. So the government have announced 3 dedicated courtrooms for rape trials. That's a good thing, isn't it?
The government's announcements today in terms of the courts is good, but there are 77 Crown Courts across the country, and the government have said that 3 of those will be specialist rape courts, and that's not good enough, Gloria. We've got a situation where victims are it's taking victims longer than ever to have their day in court, up to 3 years. Rape prosecutions are at record lows, and every Crown Court across the country should have this specialism, having staff there to support victims, getting cases heard. So 3 out of 77 really isn't good enough.
We look at what's going to happen in these three courts. All the court staff, the police and the prosecutors working there, they'll receive specialist trauma training under a pilot of the plans. And independent sexual violence advisors will be made available to victims. Victims will be able to give pre-recorded evidence so they can avoid meeting their attackers in courts. That often obviously leads to victims dropping out of cases. It is definitely progress. It may not be as much as you see, but three are in the process, and perhaps it will be nationwide very soon, but they just want to get it right.
But why are we waiting so long? The government published their rape review a year ago. It took them 2 years from identifying there's a very real problem here to publish anything at all. And now we're a year on, and all we're getting is a pilot in 3 Crown courts. And that's letting victims down. And actually, it's letting rapists off. And we've seen that in those shocking prosecution rates. So whilst it is welcome, when you look at the Joint Inspectorate report published earlier this year, they said that specialist rape courts need to be set up up and down the country, across Crown courts, and it should happen immediately. This pilot isn't going even to start until October. So again, it's too little and it's too late.
Question to you. Everybody's horrified by the statistics. 1.3% of 67,125 offences recorded by the police last year led to a prosecution. Of course, this is shocking. Everyone would be appalled by that. But I put it to you, it's not actually the fault of government ministers. There's something wrong in the system.
Well, actually, there's a lot that the government could do to change the system. That's why Labour set out our survivor support package for victims of rape and serious sexual violence over a year ago, and have urged the government to adopt it. And what we say is that there should be specialist rape units in every police force and in Crown prosecution services across the country, with staff that are trained in dealing with these horrific cases. We also call for victims of rape to have a legal advocate from the moment they report the crime to the police station, right through to trial, informing them of their rights every step of the way, and driving up standards within the police and CPS. And also, we need to make sure there's accountability in government for all of this. So Labour have called for a minister responsible for rape and serious sexual violence, so that the government is truly accountable, as well as longer sentences for those that are convicted of rape. This package of support has been on the table. We've urged the government to adopt it, but yet they haven't.
Shadow Justice Minister Ellie Reeves, thank you for coming on the show today. Now, it's time for the latest in my special interviews with MPs. Craig McKinley MP shares with us why he switched from Ukip to the Conservative Party, why he thinks some Tory MPs who are trying to oust Boris Johnson are part of a Remainer plot. And he has some damning words about the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, too. Craig McKinley, you start off in politics as a member, quite a senior member of Ukip. You were deputy leader for a few years, you were acting leader for a time too in the late 90s. Why was Ukip your first political party of choice?
Well, I was involved with the Conservatives at university, but wasn't particularly political. I then trained as funny enough, my degree was in zoology, of all things. Then I became a chartered accountant and then a chartered tax advisor as well. And I think it was my time as a chartered accountant. We had that very strange period when we were in the ERM, and I had clients going bankrupt, and we had high interest rates. Those two things shouldn't go together when you're in the depths of a recession. And it was then that I think my lights went on, and what is happening here? It was the shadowing of the Deutschmark, the ERM experience. You had John Major then discussing the Maastricht Treaty, and my light went on, really. I would probably have been happy staying as a chartered accountant and might have been retired by now on a beach in Thailand. But no, here we are in Parliament. So my light went on and I pursued that very, very vigorously. There were 6 of us in a room, as I've said this many times, in a pub in Covent Garden that put the framework of Ukip together back in probably late 91. So a long time ago.
Just remind us, how old were you when your light went on?
Oh, I would have only been about 25.
Wow. Okay. I wasn't a member of UKIP, but lots of people who are watching won't have been members of UKIP. But when I was reading about it, it sounds quite fractious, like there was a period of infighting. Sometimes you were on the winning side, sometimes you were on the losing side. Do you want to just tell us about some of the fractious nature of those internal debates?
It was founded to be something new. I mean, I would say, from my point of view, and many that were gathered at the time, we were Conservatives in exile. We wanted this to be, obviously, primarily on Brexit issues. People weren't really talking about it much those days. The EU was all a bit over there, and it was, butter mountains and wine lakes and a bit of troublesomeness. But when we had the Maastricht Treaty, I think that's when a lot of people changed. When you got some colleagues of today, like Sir Bill Cash and others, the Maastricht Treaty, I think, was the Rubicon that was crossed. But within UKIP, yes, it started off all very pally, all people of the same mind. But I suppose it's the nature of politics. We ended up with fractiousness. We ended up in High Court. It was a mess at times. There were all sorts of arguments going on, people vying for the main chance. Particularly my dear old friend Nigel Farage. I was very friendly with him those days. And by 2005, it was just looking a bit sullied, frankly. We had the first of our MEPs, 2 of them were in court for various frauds, and I thought this was not what it's meant to be. And it was becoming normal to be able to talk about Brexit again within the Conservative Party, so I took the leap back to the Conservative Party a long time ago, 17 years ago. And, it's all turned out well-ish. We had our Brexit referendum, which, of course, was what I wanted out of politics. And you might say my work is done, but I'm not entirely sure it is. We've got the Northern Ireland Protocol that might be being discussed. And also, I've got a new campaign, and that is to get some common sense on our dash to net zero. So I've got a new lease of life.
And we're going to talk to you about that shortly. But I want to, so you decided to leave UKIP and join the Conservative Party in 2005, and you've explained why. I want to know how you felt when, in April 2006, David Cameron, during a radio phone-in, described UKIP members as being fruitcakes, loonies, and closet racists, mostly. How do you plead?
Well, I think that was a very ill-founded statement, particularly the racist bit, because I didn't see racism in UKIP. They were getting a few, I think it was where the BNP was subsiding, some of those people then took the leap from the far right to UKIP, which I think added to the whole mix of why I didn't feel comfortable there anymore. But, generally the hierarchy of UKIP was not a racist institution at all. But I think David Cameron did a lot of Conservative members a disservice, because there were an increasing number of Conservative members having similar concerns by 2006 that I'd held for a very, very long time. So, yeah, I do remember that statement very well. And I know rather comically, I think UKIP at the time created a tie saying, yeah, I'm a fruitcake or whatever. But no, that was ill-advised. And a decade later, he was taken out on the altar of another EU issue, of which we've lost a lot of prime ministers over time. I'd hoped that it had gone, settled, finished, but I think with potential rows emerging over the Northern Ireland Protocol, particularly by some of my One Nation colleagues, we could be having a row all over again.
What are you saying about your One Nation colleagues?
Well, there's a number of factions. We had the vote of no confidence or confidence in the Prime Minister just recently, and rather different from when the Theresa May, I think it was 117, and I was one of them, voted against her. That was a very constitutional issue about not delivering Brexit, not delivering on that 16 referendum. But this time, we've got a number of factions, I think, at play here. You've got some who just don't like Boris. There's a number who just never liked Boris throughout his political career. Then you've got others who are concerned about Brexit. They're still fighting the Brexit war. And dare I say, Tobias Ellwood, I think, let the cat out of the bag last week by saying we should go back into the single market. So there's a faction of those. Then you've got those who have been shuffled out of government, or those who think they're so marvellous they should be in government. And then you've got those which I would be normally quite aligned with, and that would be like your Philip Davies view of the Conservative Party, that we're not really delivering enough Conservative policies. But overlaying all of that, we've got a Brexit battle I think is still continuing, is who do you replace? The Conservative Party is always a very wide and broad church. Always has been. I think of all the political parties, it is the broadest of churches that accommodates people like me, who I put myself down as a right of centre libertarian conservative, to those who are, perhaps more one nation, left of centre conservatism, quite a lot of government control and interference. So it accommodates all of us. So that's where we are today. And I think the Partygate, I'm not sure that Partygate actually had much to do with calling that vote last week. It became that sort of culmination of all those that have got these negative feelings. It sort of burst forth, and the 54 threshold to Sir Graham Brady was reached, and we had that vote last week. Of course, nobody's sure what everybody voted, but I voted to support the Prime Minister because, in my view, he's the best on offer, delivered that huge election result that we hadn't seen for a generation. His feelings on Brexit are aligned with mine. But of course, I want to nudge him in the direction of proper Conservative policies. But that's the battle within the Conservative Party that's always taken place. And I'm sure there were similar battles going on in the Labour Party when you were there as well.
Do you honestly think that there is a movement or part of the vote of no confidence in Boris Johnson was motivated in your party by a desire to overturn Brexit?
Soften Brexit, I'm sure. Absolutely soften Brexit. There are some who would like us back in the single market and a closer orbit with the European Union. And I'm sure when we see, once the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill actually goes to second reading and beyond through the subsequent stages of it, I think we'll see very clearly who they are.
What's your message to them?
Let's get on with this job. Let's make the best of Brexit opportunities, which I will say we have not really taken advantage of. I think we've got a civil service against a lot of these measures so that we don't diverge and use those freedoms fully. But I would say, please, let's get on with this job. We were elected to get Brexit done. We're elected with a very, very big majority, a handsome majority that we don't see very often. And we have the opportunity to make Britain a better place. But, sadly, I do recognise that the COVID period put lots of things on ice, and we've only got 2 years left before the next election.
What do you say to colleagues who are plotting, as we speak, I'm sure, about when to come back, when to have the next go to get rid of Boris Johnson?
Well, the obviously 1922 rules mean that it should be safe for a year. That's not to say that rules can't be changed, and I think that was being discussed with the Theresa May time. But I would say let's buckle down to some conservatism. We've got local elections, particularly across Kent in my area next year, and a divided party at the centre is never a good look to the electorate. We do need a united party within that broad umbrella that we've always had, and having a few rows behind closed doors, which is where these things should be done.
You were quite rude about the government's decision to impose that temporary windfall tax on energy firms. You said, I am, all in all, I'm disappointed, embarrassed and appalled that a Conservative Chancellor could come up with this tripe.
I stand by those words. I think a windfall tax is appalling because it is a number of indications. It's saying to foreign companies who might want to base here, the type of things that we want and need are, you do rather too well and we'll be taxing you. Additionally, the oil companies, I don't fly a flag for the oil companies at all, but we're asking them to go gangbusters for more gas and oil out of the North Sea, which will require a lot of investment. We're asking them to do a lot on the net zero stuff, to actually push hydrogen and all those other technologies, very costly, will require a lot of investment. We've got pension funds that are reliant on those stream of high quality dividends as one of the ultimate blue chip companies. It just says so much bad about doing business in Britain. And let's be honest, they're already facing a tax of 40%. They face a special tax. To up that to 65%, in my view, is penal and just not what Conservatives should be doing.
Do you expect to get a Christmas card from Rishi Sunak after saying that about him?
Well, it'll be one of those where you sort of lick your finger and see if it's a real signature, I'm sure. But I do tend to get a Christmas card from Rishi, but I do cross swords with him quite regularly on tax policies. As I say, I'm a chartered accountant, chartered tax advisor. I'm still nominally in practice, so I do see what is actually happening out there. I have communication with lots of businesses and in the constituency as well. So yeah, I do make my thoughts very well known. I was against the national insurance rise for similar reasons, because you tax things that are bad. You tax things like alcohol and cigarettes that you're trying to, suppress demand of. You don't try and suppress demand for things that are good, and that's jobs.
Final question. We've talked a lot about politics. I know you lost your mum 5 years ago.
Yeah, just about. Yeah.
And we like to show that politicians are human beings in these interviews too. How was the grieving process for you?
People might say I got over it rather well, actually. I've, we sort of moved away from it. She was ill for a few months, but it was quite rapid at the end. And my father was always older, and he was always the one that was the slightly creaking door. But he's remarkably well, 5 years on, still driving, 88 this year. And he's gone off on a golfing holiday with some of his pals. So, he's still at it, but I think he struggled with it because they've been married for 60 years. My mother was very young when they got married. It probably doesn't happen much these days. She was 18 and 2 months, which I suppose was the thing in the late 50s, but you don't see so much of that today. But yeah, she's a very big hole that is lost. And we had our daughter after she died, and she would have just been so delighted with her, because she is everyone would say that their daughter is a little gem, but she'd have really loved her. So that is a sadness every time you look at her, because she's got a few traits and looks of my mother, and she would have just been over the moon with her. So that's a great sadness.
Craig McKinley, great pleasure. Thank you. You can watch all my Real Me interviews on our YouTube channel or catch them on the Real Me podcast. Listen wherever you get your podcast from, just search for GB News. Thanks for getting in touch today. Tom says a couple of years ago I had a tenant who got a dog against his tenancy agreement. The dog was left during the day and let loose in the street. I had complaints from the council. When I brought it up with the tenant, he stopped paying his rent, and it took months to get him out, costing me over £8,000. Paul has been in touch. The ministerial code is outdated for the 21st century. Thank you for your company. Thank you for watching. Up next, it is On the Money with Liam Halligan, and he is with me now. What is coming up? Hello.
We got talking about Bank of England interest rate rises, Gloria. Of course, the Bank of England's raised interest rates by 0.25% this lunchtime. Some people, they think they should have done more. Of course, it means more pain for those on variable rate mortgages and those who take on more debts in the future. On the other hand, the bank's now saying that inflation is going to hit 11% this autumn. That's headline inflation.
Prices.
CPI. The retail price index will no doubt be even higher. So my personal view is that they should have raised interest rates more, but we'll be discussing that with our usual panel of experts and indeed with some GB News viewers.
Great stuff. Cheers, Liam. You have been watching or listening to The Briefing with me, Gloria De Piero. Tom Howard will be here tomorrow at noon. I am back on Monday. And now it is time for the wonderful weather.
Hello, it's going to turn fine and dry across the bulk of the UK in the next couple of days. There will be some rain in the northwest through Thursday, but elsewhere it'll be fine, dry and turning increasingly hot and humid. If we look at the pressure pattern then through the rest of Thursday, then you can see high pressure very much dominating across the UK. And as we head into Thursday into Friday, we start to drag in a more southerly airflow, and that's really going to lift those temperatures. So I think Friday will be the peak of the heat, where we can see temperatures in the low to locally mid-30s. Back to Thursday afternoon, then you can see some rain towards the north and the west, affecting Scotland and Northern Ireland, some showery outbreaks of rain affecting Aberdeenshire. But elsewhere across the bulk of England, Wales, Northern England as well, it'll be fine and dry. Variable amounts of cloud at times in the west, but still plenty of sunshine to come. And in that southeast corner, look at these temperatures. We could see highs of 29 or 30 degrees. That would make it the warmest day of the year so far. Still cooler, though, towards the north and the west. As we head through the rest of Thursday into the evening and overnight, then you can see heavy, more persistent rain spreading in across Scotland and Northern Ireland, so turning quite wet here.